Sure. Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for putting up with me today. So I'm here today to talk about customer experience and user experience, and for me this is a huge field and I could talk for days and days and days and kill everyone in the room. So what I've got today is a short presentation. What I want you to do is bear in mind as I go through what you'd like to know more of, because I'm happy to come back and deep dive on certain subjects. Today it's kind of a bit of a broad brush approach, but hopefully it's interesting to you. So I want to start by the quote at the top there: simple is hard, easy is harder, invisible is hardest. The point about good design, and user experience is about good design, is about making something invisible. It's so intuitive you barely even notice that you're using it. It just kind of fades away into what you're doing. It's a goal of all good design. Now, when you start looking at any business, at any startup, at any interface, at anything you're doing, you have a focus on what your needs are. And that's the big rock over there. You start thinking, well, this is what I want to do. These are the customers I want to sell to. This is what I want them to do. I want them to buy this. I want them to do this. And sitting at the other end of that are all your customers, your users. And their needs can sometimes outweigh your own in terms of you should really be focusing on what they need, not on what you as an organisation needs. And that's something which probably everyone in the room understands. But it quickly gets lost when you get into the design process. So what does it mean in reality? In reality, it means that our job as UX and CX people is to make the world easier to use. It's tough enough as it is. What I see on a day-to-day basis are designs that confuse people, websites that confuse people. We do a lot of testing with people who need good user experience more than anyone else. And by that I mean people who are older and who are struggling, people who don't have English as a first language and are really trying to integrate with this country, people with a disability who are working with a visual impairment or a cognitive impairment or a physical impairment who are trying to access services or systems that they need. I've just finished a project where we're working on websites that relate to death, to finding funeral services, which on the one hand is a service and you look at it and think, well, it's a business doing something. But on the other side of that are people who are in tears, and it's probably one of the most touching pieces of research I've ever done. Talking to people who have had a family member die, and then on top of that, if you can imagine the horror of losing a partner of 40 years, they now have to go and find somebody to deliver this service for them. They have to go online, they have to go through the service, they have to go through the product, they have to understand all of this information at a time when their ability to answer even a simple question has almost disappeared. User experience is about trying to bridge that gap and make their lives better. That's what our job is. So what does it really mean? If you take a look, there's your customer on one side, there's you on the other, and there's a bridge in between you. You're trying to bridge that gap. And traditionally what happened was we made things functional. So we made something that did the job. You think about the very first versions of Microsoft Word or the very first version of any app you've ever used, and it probably was functional. It might not have been particularly usable. It did something and you enjoyed that, but it didn't do more. So the next step is to make it usable. And usable means it's efficient, it's effective, and I can do what I need to do. That's great. But now there are 50 competitors out there that are also usable. So why should people use that thing and not something else? And the difference, the missing piece of the bridge, is the great experience, because that's what makes something persuasive. It means the design doesn't just do what I want it to do. It does it in a way that is pleasant and pleasing and makes me want to come back and use that interface again. So when you talk about what user experience or customer experience means, it's really about that missing piece of the puzzle. It's not just doing the job. It's not just making the job easy. It's about delivering an experience that people love. So what I'm going to do now is take a bit of a trip back through time, and I'm going to go through the history, the evolution of UX. Now, I don't know if too many people in the room remember this, but I was actually working in the field in the 80s. That's probably not something to be too proud of, but I was. And the 80s really were a time when users didn't count, for the most part. Systems were designed and built in big mainframe systems. They had lots of developers sitting in a dark room somewhere coding these massive pieces of software, and software was just given, it was delivered. So what I've got here is a really simple set of icons to try and show you. It was deliver, design, build, and then chuck it out the other end. And whether the customers could use it or not really didn't count. And what traditionally happened was the software guys gave the thing over to the support guys, who then had to write a user manual that was that thick. and then give it to someone and say, well, there you are, just read all of that, and it will all make sense eventually, hopefully. And that was the 80s. It was a wonderful time. And then we evolved, and the 90s were the decade of users are stupid. Now, nobody would have said that, but everybody thought it. In the back of their heads, they thought, well, yeah, they kind of can't figure it out. We give them these really easy-to-use things, and nobody makes it work. And what they just, how do we just kind of get better users than these guys? But it was a bit of a shifting time, and for the first time, really, the design process started to kick in at the front. And people said, okay, let's kind of work out what it looks like first. And then we would develop it, and develop, and then we'd get to the end. And before you launched, we said, okay, well, maybe we should test it with people and make sure that it kind of works, and we're getting there. And that meant that we started for the first time to see just how bad some of these designs were. And you started to understand that usability was actually really important. So the 90s were a decade of change in that perspective. Then along came the user is king. Everybody was saying the user's king, the user's king, the user comes first. And what we started to do then was, first of all, we had to understand the user, so we had to do some kind of research. And then once we understood them, we could do some kind of design, and then we could test it with them. So prototyping started to come along. We could prototype, and we could test it, and okay, now we know it's going to work. And now we can develop it, and we can test again at the end to make sure we've done a good thing, and now we can deliver. So the process entirely changed. And for once, the development didn't start first. It was research and design, which was great. And in today's world, that's gotten even more complex because, first of all, ideation started to kick in. It wasn't just about researching their needs. It was about, well, how do we can't just make it simple now. We have to make it persuasive. And that means understanding what they want, but also what they don't even know they want. So that's where ideation started to kick in. So then the process then started to become research, then ideate, then design, then test. And now you can develop and you can deliver. But those pieces all started to become interchangeable, and that's the world we're living in today, and probably everybody in this room is experiencing that you don't do them all in that sequence anymore. You may do all of those things in a day. You may do all of those things in a week. You may be working in an agile environment where you've got runs of design, and this is going through an iteration after iteration after iteration. So today's world has changed quite a lot from a UX/CX perspective. I remember working on projects in the 90s where the UX and design phase would run over 3 to 6 months. It seems inconceivable in today's world that you would have 6 months to just sit and play with design and just test and test and retest and retest and just keep on doing that for 6 months. It just wouldn't work. So the world has changed a lot. So why does it count? Can anybody tell me what all of these have in common? Anyone? They're all expensive, yes. True. Anything else? Sorry? Quality? No. The thing they've all got in common is they've all caused death because of bad design. So starting with the Tesla at the top, I mean, forget motor vehicles in general, the amount of death that they cause on the roads every day due to bad design. You don't see someone in the pillar, or you miss information that's critical and hit someone. Affordance of the information you're looking over here when something happens over there. But the Tesla in particular, so Tesla self-driving car killed a driver because it didn't recognise the truck due to information going in and it not doing the right thing. An A330 crashed. There's been multiple plane crashes due to poor design, but in that particular case, it was because of bad feedback. So the pilot was given information, the feedback didn't match what he was experiencing in the plane, and he thought he was experiencing a mechanical failure. He was trying to react to that and correct. The autopilot was trying to give him the right information and caused him to crash the plane, killing everybody on board. Piper Alpha, my father was actually about 50 yards from the Piper Alpha when it went up. That was process design. So the guy that put a blanking plate on a main pipe, a main oil pipe. He put a blanking plate on and he had a piece of paper saying, whatever you do, do not turn this on. Do not turn this on. The plate is closed. And he put it in the control room. The process didn't say, do something important with this, so he just put it down and it got lost. So the next shift came on. The next shift didn't realise the pipe was closed, turned it on, caused a massive explosion, killed hundreds and hundreds of people. In this case, it was a cursor. So US warship shot down a civilian plane over the Gulf due to bad design in the cursors. So in this case, the radar operator was using a cursor which he thought selected the plane that was flying towards them, and he thought he was listening to that plane and he was hearing military information, so he assumed it was a military flight. Because he hadn't used the right cursor, because in that system there were two different cursors. One would select to listen to and one would select for information. He'd used the wrong one because he'd gotten confused. Therefore, he was working on the information that it was a military flight, so therefore it didn't respond and they shot it down and killed everyone on board. Bad design. And in the case of, and you probably won't believe this, but in the case of the Challenger crash, PowerPoint is deemed to be partially to blame. Because of the structure and information in the PowerPoint presentations that were provided to the people in charge, and how the information was filtered and structured out so that PowerPoint had a very nice small view about the risk involved in the next flight. They didn't understand how big that risk was, therefore they cleared it for takeoff and it crashed and killed everyone on board. So there's a link at the top. I'll share this at the end. You can look at that link, you can read all about it, but that's just a few examples of what happens when user experience isn't taken into account. There are millions on the web. You go out and look for bad design, bad signage, bad software, bad apps. You'll find it everywhere. But on the other side of the coin, what does good design do? When you get design right, when the experience is right, you get success. And if you look at the rise and seemingly unstoppable rise of Facebook, a lot of that is down to understanding what people want and understanding what they need and delivering it through a good user experience. Same with the iPhone. iPhone has been deemed to be the number one most influential gadget of the last 50 years by Time. You look at all of the devices and the software and the apps that are taking over the world today, and that's because these organisations invest in customer experience. They invest in understanding what is going to make people love that product. Not just it's usable. It doesn't just make a call. It's lovable. It's something which you engage with to a level that you never thought you ever would with a phone. If you went back to the days of having a Nokia phone, anybody, show of hands, who had an old Nokia phone? Right, in those days, did you ever think that you'd end up with a phone like this? We didn't. We didn't think we needed it. We'd laughed at those kind of phones. I remember the first iPhone coming out and thinking, it'll never take off. And look where we are today. So, as a bit of an example, again, show of hands, who's got an iPhone or been involved with opening an iPhone? Okay, great, so about half the room. Okay, what's the experience like? Anybody? What is the experience like when you get an iPhone and you take it out of the box? It's nice, right? It's sexy. Apple have put an awful lot of effort into making sure that the experience is good. It turns on. I just bought a drone, a $1,500 drone the other day, that you get it out of the box. First thing you had to do was download updates. The second thing you had to do was charge the batteries. They took a minimum of 1 hour to charge. And there's me jumping up and down waiting to fly my drone for at least an hour until and then I found out actually it takes two batteries because one had to go in the controller. So it's 2 hours until I could fly it for the first time. There were tears. So it's a great experience, right? Contrast with who likes putting together IKEA furniture? Oh, you do? You insane people, you. But they put a lot of effort into making the instructions make sense, and they've taken the words out of them. But I end up in tears every time I try to put one of these things together. Okay, they can be. You look at the experience though of the difference between opening an iPhone and opening a Billy, and then trying to put it together. It's a very different thing. So one of the things I was asked to do today was to try to explain the different roles that exist in the UX industry. Now, I'm going to do my best, and it's not easy, and there is a reason for it, which I'll explain in a while. But so just starting with a more or less common breakdown: marketing, research, design, creative design, development, testing, delivery, and service. So if you think about that kind of streamline of work, then at kind of the lowest level, if you get a UX researcher, generally they're focusing just on the research. If you get a UI designer, then they're looking across the design, which is the structural design, architectural design, and the creative design. In the middle of those two, you can have an information architect who generally just looks at the architectural information design in the middle there. If you have a UI developer or a UI engineer, then they tend to be across this space here. A UX tester focuses just on testing generally, And then you have the more general UX or interaction or product designer who kind of works across the whole range, and a UX strategist who works pretty much from one end to the other. Now, that changes almost every organisation you talk to. So every time I meet someone who is any of those roles, they'll tell me what is involved in their role, and in general, it all changes. So I've met information architects who are responsible for doing all the research. I've met UI designers who do all the creative, but they also get involved in service design at the other end. So it's a bit of a movable feast, but hopefully that will try to give you a bit of an idea. But there's something which I do want to point out, is that people who work just in this space, there's a bit of a tendency for everybody nowadays to end up with the term UX. So I'm a UX designer, I'm a UX researcher, I'm a UX. So UX is in there somewhere for pretty much everyone. And at one level that is true, because everything that touches the customer is part of the experience. So if you're designing the box or the user manual, then yes, you are designing part of the user experience. If you're answering the phone on support, then yes, you're part of the user and the customer experience, because you are helping the customer to get a sense of the organisation, and it's part of the experience too, is being supported. But when you're working in this space, it's not really fully UX, and there is a reason why. Listen to yourself, not the noise of the world, only you know what is right for you, which is very true, except for one important fact here, is what's right for the customer. Now, what I see an awful lot of today are people who call themselves UXers, and they say, oh, yeah, we're all about the customer's experience, we're all about CX, we're all about UX. And I'll say to them, okay, great, when's the last time you actually met and talked to a customer? Oh, we don't do that. We design great experiences, we design great apps. Okay, so what do your customers think of those apps? Well, I don't know. I guess we're selling some, it must be right. So it's a passion of mine that user or customer experience involves the user or the customer. You have to be researching them, you have to be testing them, you have to be involving them in the process, or else you're not really doing UX. So why is it that confusing? Well, there are 10, 15, 20 different diagrams that try to lay out how do those roles work. Some of them have, this one's got the business and the development and the functionality and experience, the front end. There are others that map out the customer and the technology and the business, and there are others that map out every other aspect, front end, back end, etc., platform. And any way you carve it, you end up with hundreds and hundreds of these areas that cross over, and some people will find themselves in one place or working across several, so it is very difficult to pin that down and say that's what the role entails. So what I want to do is just give a bit of a high-level view of what it's like working. Now, I probably explained at the start, but I work in a UX field. I run a UX research and testing company. And so really I focus across those three core areas of research, design and test. So what I want to do is just give you a bit of a sense of what that's like today. So unsurprisingly, probably, it really hasn't changed that much in the last 15 years or so. It's still about talking to people. The people that I talk to can sometimes be much more varied. So I'm often talking to people at the other ends of the world. We're talking to people all across Australia. We're talking to people in very disparate locations. But really, the people we're talking to are the customers. So it's often people who are currently the customer or have been the customer and have left, or are the ideal person who should be the customer but they're not yet signed up. People who've shown interest in being the customer but for one reason or another didn't go forward. It's all about talking and listening. And there are a lot of good research skills, and again, this is something I could talk for hours on and I'm not going to. There are a lot of good researching skills on how you talk to those people, and how you listen, and how you get the information from them about what they need, and how you separate that from what they'd like. Because quite often people will talk and say, well, I'd love one of these, and I'd love feature A, and feature B would be great, and it'd be wonderful if it made a cup of tea for me too. And they'll give you a list of things that would be lovely. But which ones of those will actually sell the product? Which ones of those will actually get them to engage with your interface and move forward with it? It's somewhat more difficult to tell. In terms of technology, it really hasn't changed that much. Analytics is part of the story now, so we can look at analytics and understand the movement of audiences and where they back away, where they exit. recording has changed slightly, so we don't walk around with tape recorders anymore. Surveys have changed. Surveys are now all online, and really, it takes seconds to put them together. But at the end of the day, all of that is generalised information. Doesn't solve the problem for you. You really have to talk to someone and understand. So that really hasn't changed vastly over the years. What has changed is the world of design. So there are a number of great tools available today to design interfaces, and that's from a visual perspective and from an architectural perspective. So the ones I've got on screen here are Balsamiq and Axure and Envision, just as a couple of examples. There are many, many others out there, and I can give you some. I've got some links at the end of this, and there are others as well you'll find. These tools make it really easy and fast and simple to rapidly draw a design, to rapidly iterate it into a better design, to put it in front of people and test and see if it works. So our ability to create interfaces has become much easier. It's also very easy now to generate that onto any type of platform, to chuck it on a phone, chuck it onto iPads, even chuck it onto watch interfaces, put it onto something that you can, you put it on the right platform that the person would be using, and you can record that as well at the other end. So that's changed a lot. As has testing. So if anybody visited a usability test lab back in the 90s, you would have seen cameras. It looked a bit like a movie set. You'd have a one-way mirror. You'd have 3-4 cameras set up around the room, some of them trying to be hidden cameras. You'd have a bank of recorders that would be recording everything onto, if they were really up to date, it was DVD, but a lot of them still had VHS. They had all this equipment everywhere. Most of that's gone away. So these days, you can usability test on any laptop with a webcam. Gives you the user, gives you audio, gives you the screen. You're 90% of the way there. So technology for testing has gotten a lot simpler. You can certainly still do that testing, and a lot of companies still do, because it is a great way to scientifically formalise the process of testing. You separate the company from the interface from all other contexts, and then you can test and see what works. So that still takes place, but a lot of ad hoc testing takes place too. The recording software, there are numerous applications again. So there's a bunch that work across all platforms, and some will work on Mac and some work on Windows. But they'll record. You can cast the phone, so you can have people playing on the phone. That gets cast to the desktop where you can record it. So working on multiple devices is really simple and easy to record. There's also, we are currently beta testing an application called Flex, which is a way of recording what you see, your observations and the feedback from people during testing, and putting all that into a simple way to prioritise and decide what to do next. We've developed that at the moment, and anybody here tonight who wants access to that, we're happy to provide access to. It's not yet public, but if you want to come and see me afterwards, I'll organise for you to gain access to that, and you're happy to, we're happy for you to use it to record any kind of research you do. I'd rather people did research and got some feedback than not do it at all for lack of tools. So wrapping up, and I think I've probably gone over my time, but just wrapping up, what I wanted to do was leave you guys with some resources and links to take a look at next if you're interested in UX. So a few places to look. So General Assembly is one location that is good for training and testing. So they've got some good information, some good courses there on how to learn more about UX and CX and how to get into design. The others on this page are pretty much all resources that are useful for reading articles, blogs, getting hints and tips and advice and guidance and any other information around the UX CX space that you might want. And this isn't by no means an exhaustive list. There's plenty out there. A couple of resources that you might also want to look at. So Axure, I mentioned, and Balsamiq, both of those, and Envision too. Both of those are prototyping platforms, so they'll work really well if you want to prototype something. Envision is a great tool. It's just more focused on the creative side. So if you have the Adobe suite, then Envision's the best way to go from a prototyping perspective. But if you don't and you're just working from scratch, then Balsamiq and Axure can do the job. If you can't afford those tools, there are free and very simple ways to prototype before that, but that's just a good way to start. Usertesting.com, I don't personally think it gives you the best feedback because it's a random bunch of people who go in there and sign up. But it is a way to get some feedback for a relatively low cost. So you can go to there and you can say, I want 10 people to come or 100 people to come and use this thing and tell me how well it works, and you can see the results and get some more detail on what's working and what's not in a relatively cheap way.
Can you please go back
That one? Good. Crazy Egg is, and again, there are some others around, but Crazy Egg is a great tool for recording sessions online, so you can see what people are doing as they're visiting web pages. And those tools, again, they're all good information. They're not the best, because you can see that someone leaves. You don't know why they've left. That's part of the problem. So that's where you still have to talk to the audience. But they are a good way to get some feedback. And Optimizely is an A/B testing tool, so you can try what happens if we design A or design B. Do we get more people to sign up through either one of those two? I'll make this list available as well if anyone's got anything else. That's it from me. Apologies if I ran too long, but any questions? CX is customer experience. So there's a bit of a debate depending on who you ask. Some people say customer experience is the entire thing end to end. So customer experience is right from first awareness of the brand through to the end of their life experience with the brand. So it certainly includes the digital part in the middle, but it also includes awareness of it and decision-making process, the purchasing, the branding, then the product, but then the product arriving, using the product, servicing the product, eventually throwing the product away. So that's kind of customer experience is the whole thing. The argument in the field is that user experience is only digital, but then people like me who've been working since the start always saw user experience as the whole thing. So from my perspective, there's not much difference, but some people see it that way. Anything else? Yeah. They have a new function they want and they just want it done. They just want it done. How do you persuade to get there's only really two arguments that can work. They don't always work. But the first one is the dollar value. There's research that says the cost of fixing a mistake later is hundreds of times higher than the cost of putting it right in the first place, building it right the first time. So the last figures I've seen were 200 times as much. So for every dollar you spend, in essence, on getting it right up front, you're going to save yourself a fortune down the track. So that's an argument that works for some people, but only those who kind of understand that it's likely to go wrong, because the mindset generally is, well, it won't go wrong because we know what we're doing, so we're going to build it right. There's an analogy I use with developers often, which is that you may be a great developer. It's like being a world-class chef. You could be the best chef there is, but when I walk in and sit down at your restaurant, how do you know you're going to cook me the right meal? You don't know I'm allergic to peanuts until you ask me, right? So you could kill me with your meal if you think you know what you're doing. So you don't know you can serve the right thing until you know what the person wants. So that will hit the button with some people, but not with others. And the biggest way that I've found in the past is through user testing, because there is nothing that converts people to be an absolute zealot for this stuff like seeing a user using your product and not figuring it out. And it's converted so many people. I've lost count. So what I normally recommend doing is you get someone. I mean, it's difficult when you're developing a new feature and you don't know whether people are going to want it or not. That's kind of tough. But in terms of what's there already, if you think it's really usable, then it's not going to help so much. But if you think, well, I'm already concerned, and that's where we get called in a lot. People have concerns and they say, like, the developers are quite happy with what they've done, but we're thinking maybe there are some issues here. What we do is we sit people down, we get them to use it, and they stumble, and you'll see them just stumble. And often it's things that are right on the page, and you think, how can they miss that? You've asked them, who was the quote from, and you think, well, how can they miss that on this page? It's right there. And they'll miss it. And it's not until they miss it that you think, okay, what's going wrong? And you start understanding, okay, there's a flow here. The eye is flowing down this side of the page. They're not flowing over to here. And when they do, this is so big, it's drawing their attention. They're looking down here. They're skipping right over that little line in the middle. They're not seeing it. The brain takes in so much information that it makes massive decisions. It divides the page up into slabs and says, that's not important. That's a logo. That's copied. That's something about the product description. That's the quote here. And so the brain makes all of these decisions, and once it's made a decision and it said, okay, but that's something I don't care about, it disappears. It completely disappears, and people can look at this page and look at this page and look at this page, and they won't see the thing that you want them to see. So, and once you see them test it, you know for sure that that there are issues that need to be fixed. So, if you can't do anything else, I mean, the monetary argument is one of the best ones to work with at first, but even if you just get one person, and as I said, a laptop can record a session. There's free software that you can install on a laptop that you can sit it in front of someone. It records the webcam, records their audio. You give them a completely context-free task on your website or product, and you stand back and you watch. And if it works and everything goes exactly as expected, then great. If they start to struggle, then that's gold dust. So you just capture that and you take it back to them and say, look, this is what our customers are experiencing. So I found that is the most effective way to do it. Anything else? Okay, so I'll shut up. But as I said, if anybody wants a deeper dive on UX, if there's any subjects that you guys come up with that you really want me to spend 20 minutes or half an hour on next time, I'm happy to come along and do that.
All right, hello everyone, my name is Asjad. As you can see, I work as a technical expert in cybersecurity at Telstra, and I'll be touching on modern cybersecurity today. So before we start, I'd just like to gauge the audience a bit. So how many of you guys work on a digital product that actually makes money using an app or a website or a web service? Okay, that's pretty much most of the audience here. Okay, cool. How many of you have worked in like security or worked as a developer and you were ever concerned about security? Okay, so fairly technical audience here. And how many of you guys are like startup owners or business owners here at iAccelerate? Okay, cool. So I think it's fair to say most of you would appreciate the fact cybersecurity is a business risk. It's like having insurance, in my opinion, right? So when you want to make money over the internet, say you have an app or you have a website and you want to go out there, you want to do business, you want to have people use your products. How do you do that but not lose your entire business to attackers or somebody trying to steal your customers' data or somebody who's trying to like breach your integrity of the data and essentially sort of make you lose trust in the industry, right? It's like having sort of like insurance at your shop or having fire protection when something just burns and you have nothing left. So cybersecurity is really interesting. In this day and age when you see so many articles on the news and so many blog posts saying, oh, ransomware, ooh, wanna cry, UK hospital gone down. So it gets really scary and people start thinking about how they've implemented security in their apps, in their business, in their organizations. So I'm just going to be touching on a few basic sort of ways of doing modern cybersecurity properly, and then I'll be going into like sort of things where I'll be sort of touching on where cybersecurity is moving towards and what you can expect for the future of cybersecurity, depending on how time allows. So before we move into the technical details, here's a bit of a threat report. So this report's from Telstra's cybersecurity white paper last year. And this diagram here, you can pretty much see the size of the shape is sort of the percentage of how common that kind of attack is. So as you can see, in the Asia Pacific region, phishing and email-related attacks were the most common, and those cost organizations and individuals the most amount of money. So, that's things like, oh, your Dropbox account's expiring. Can you please log in again? Or, hey, Australia Post, you've received a parcel. Can you collect the parcel? There's actually malware in there, and then that compromises your organization or your business or even your personal computer, which you use at work. So you're essentially being a vector for that malware to get into your organization. So that's the most common type of attack. Lots of people fall for it. It's hard to believe how many people fall for that kind of attack. The second most popular one is malware and ransomware. So as I was saying, ransomware is a pretty popular one. The reason being, so malware, we all pretty much know it's software with malicious intentions. Once it gets into your computer, it goes and causes havoc. It deletes some important files, or it transmits your important information to attackers. So it's being a Trojan, or it's doing something that you don't want it to do, and it has malicious intentions behind it. Ransomware is when that malware gets in and pretty much locks down your entire computer. It encrypts all the information on there. Encryption is pretty much obfuscation of data. So all your data and all your important information pretty much turns into white noise. And you can't use that data unless you have the encryption key. And as the name suggests, ransomware, you pretty much got to pay ransom in Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency, and you may or may not get your data back. So it's a pretty bad situation to be in. Third most common, distributed denial of service attacks. Now, denial of service is when somebody gives you so much traffic that you're so overwhelmed you can't serve your legitimate customers, right? It's like me saying, hey, I'm just going to take this massive hose of water and sort of point it towards this small hole. And that sort of entry point gets so overwhelmed, you don't have the bandwidth to cater for actual legitimate customers. And in that way, you lose actual business, you lose money, and you lose the trust that you have in your customers. So that's pretty bad. There's advanced persistent threats. They're sort of like an upcoming sort of attack that you see a lot nowadays. So what that means is pretty much when somebody's found a breach in your organization or somebody's found an entry point, it may be from a time where you were doing maintenance. It might not even be there now. It could be some kind of temporary entry point that somebody's sort of made use of. They've gotten into your environment and they're just sort of like staying there. They're not making themselves visible. They're just staying there, listening to your sort of communications. They're sort of constantly looking at your data, but they're not making themselves visible. So they're just like a hidden sort of layer inside a network. And once they get in, they start moving laterally and they start sort of, engulfing your sort of digital environment. They start finding out more about what you're doing. And in that way, they can sort of analyze where your weak points are, when you're most vulnerable to attacks, and then in that way, they can compromise you. So if you want to read more, you can just check out the link, telstra.com/cyberreport. And they've got like a bit of literature there and a few statistics. A few more stats, though. This survey was conducted in the Asia-Pacific region for medium-sized companies, so about 500 employees. And 60% of those organizations reported that they experienced some kind of ransomware-related incident. So, I mean, that's pretty hard to believe, right? Like, how many of you guys have come across a ransomware incident? So just 3 people from this entire group of people. But 60%, that's a pretty substantial number. So it kind of goes on to say, when you're dealing in a large organization or when you're dealing in a complex environment, you've got so many more entry points that have come in. Those stats pretty much blow out of proportion. Out of those organizations, 57% report that they paid ransom, and only 33% of those who paid, 33% of those who paid didn't get their data back. So they basically paid money and they got nothing. They were still screwed, right? 33% of them were targeted by phishing emails, so the most popular type of attack. 59% businesses impacted with at least one security incident. And the largest DDoS attack that was observed in the Asia-Pacific region was 800 gigabits per second. So that's about 100 hours of Netflix per second in HD, right? So that's a lot of information to come into your organization in 1 second. Cool. So those are a few stats for you. Now, okay, the basics. How do you do cybersecurity right? Okay, so before I jump into this list of words, the words in grey, they don't really apply to people like you, people who are in the startup area or people who have sort of like tightly controlled environments. They more sort of apply to big organizations who have a lot of moving parts, legacy systems, and a lot of sort of uncertainty in how they do information security. So end-to-end encryption, that's the sort of most important thing in my opinion that everybody could do to do proper security. So as I was saying, encryption is basically obfuscating your data when you're transferring it, right? So end-to-end encryption is when, say, you are going to a website. When the website uses SSL, that means it's end-to-end encrypted. When you see the green padlock on the browser, that means anybody listening on the wire can't see what you're transmitting to the website. They can only see who you are and where you're talking to. They can't see the actual contents of the website, contents of the packets. So that's really like rule number one of any modern sort of security environment. Be it an app, website, whatever you're doing, you need to have sort of HTTPS or TLS, whatever you want to call it. Firewalls are another really good thing to have in your organization. So what firewalls pretty much do is they say, okay, this is exactly what's allowed to come in. That's exactly what's allowed to go out. They specify the number of the ports that are allowed to talk, the programs that listen to the ports. Some firewalls even do packet inspection. Some even do stateful packet inspection. So they say, okay, if a packet has something, just drop that content. Or if it doesn't follow these set of rules, don't let that into my organization. Another really good one is patching. It's pretty obvious. So if you're sort of maintaining a cluster of computers, make sure the systems are up to date, they're patched with the latest software, and that makes it really hard for attackers to sort of make use of vulnerabilities or like zero-day attacks or whatever you want to call it. So that's pretty much the best bet you have to make sure you don't have vulnerabilities. Centralized logging is kind of my favorite one here. So centralized logging is when you have all these different web services or different components in your environment. You take machine data that's generated in all those different places and you put them in one place. You process them in one place, you store them in one place so that if something goes wrong, right? Say you were compromised. You can go to that one centralized repository. You can say, okay, I think I was compromised around this time. Tell me what was going on. You have all the different log sources, and logs are very sort of informative and descriptive. So you can really paint a picture of what was happening at that time. And you can say, okay, I kind of know what was going on. I know which customers were impacted. I know which services were impacted. You can apply your patches. You can fix your issue. You can inform your customers, and you can start taking steps to fix what went wrong, right? And the good thing about centralized logging is you have a business case in addition to security, right? So as if security wasn't a good enough business case, you can also get that operational insight. So you can say, okay, I exactly understand how my environment's being used. I understand the utilization of my servers. I understand how my application reacts to traffic. I understand all these different niche characteristics of my environment. And that will sort of allow you to make better decisions when you're going forward and when you're deploying new things into your environment. Robust role-based access. So I'm sure everybody here has sort of heard like the principle of least privilege. You give somebody privileges, you sort of give them minimum privileges they need to do their job. And role-based access is basically saying, okay, you have an admin, here's all the things that the admin can do. You have a standard employee, here's all the things the standard employee can do. So in that way, you really limit the number of things somebody can do, and in that way, you sort of control what can go wrong in your environment. Code analysis is a really interesting one, and I think that really sort of applies to all of you guys here, right? So code analysis is when you sort of look at your code. It doesn't have to be manual. It can be done automatically, and it can actually be put into your continuous integration or deployment pipeline. Before it deploys, it does some static code analysis. What that will do is basically scan your code. It'll say, oh, hey, look, I found all these different vulnerabilities, or I found something here that you could do better in your code, right? Writing good and robust code is pretty much the best thing you can do for your application security, considering your environment's all good. Because especially when you're working in an agile environment, then code changes are so sort of rapid and everybody's sort of making code changes all the time. You have different versions every day. It's very easy to sort of fat finger a vulnerability, right? Or use some kind of deprecated version of some function that you're using, or leave yourself open to a MySQL injection attack, for example. So something like this could avoid, say, cross-site scripting or SQL injection. So a funny story, I used to work for this web development company a couple months ago, and I saw this code in their system, in their repository once, right? It was a PHP system, and it had a get parameter in the URL, so if it's a PHP-based system, the get parameter, you pass in the page ID and it shows you a page, right? What this one developer did once is they took the get parameter, they passed that into an exec call with no sanitization. So what that essentially means is you say, okay, here's my get parameter, anybody on the internet can use this website, right? You put in a few characters there, that gets executed with the root user's privileges on the actual machine. So a 14-year-old with about 8 characters could have completely destroyed their server with one line of code. And the best part was they didn't even have working backups. And all their websites were on this one server. So something like that could have essentially destroyed that business if nobody caught it. And that's something code analysis can catch. Policy-based security, that's a pretty boring one. So that's basically configuring policies around your infrastructure. That's saying, oh, look, this infrastructure, this server can do all these different things if it does something like that. Or if somebody changes the configuration that doesn't match this policy, raise an alarm or go and fix it. So that's something really useful to have. Credentials hygiene, maintaining good username, password, like password practices, changing your passwords, and SSL, having certificates wherever you can. That's pretty much like a given nowadays, especially when you're on the AWS sort of environment. All these other things I'm probably not going to get into because of time, but they're sort of good things to sort of keep in mind as you sort of expand. So here's the thing, right? Perfect security, that doesn't exist. Okay, you can spend as much money as you want on security. That's where it's different to insurance. You can get an insurance policy, and if you sort of if your shop burns down, you're going to get your money back. But with security, you can spend as much money as you like. But if there's some kind of attack that somebody just discovered, or somebody's been, like say the NSA has discovered some exploit and they've been hiding it from you for years, people can use that, still get into your systems and cause as much trouble as they like. So perfect security doesn't exist, but better security does. So that's where you sort of do that incremental approach to security. You keep investing in security. You look at modern practices, and you sort of keep making it better and better, and you do the best you can. So that's pretty much sort of modern practices to security. But discovery, in my slightly biased opinion, is the future of security. So probably a disclaimer: I work in the discovery team at Telstra. So what is discovery? Discovery is when you don't know what you're looking for in a massive environment, right? So traditional security, you have things of bad. You have a big bad list of everything that's bad, right? You got your rules, your signatures, and you go, okay, if I ever see this stuff, raise the massive alarm, email the CEO, turn on the fire alarm, do whatever you want. But what do you do if you don't know about the threat that's in your environment, right? When your environment's really large and complex and you have so many moving parts, every sort of employee is a vector into your organization, you're really lost, right? And that's a weak point in every sort of organization security. So discovery is the process where you don't know what you're looking for, but you've got massive amounts of data from your centralized logging repository. And you're running analytics, you're scanning that data all the time, and you're saying, okay, tell me what's weird, tell me what's anomalous, tell me what I've never seen before, or what's never happened in the environment. So here are a few components to discovery. And what I pretty much do at Telstra is work on the platform that builds this discovery capability. So you've got your threat intelligence. So you've got your bunch of people that are sitting on dark web forums, they're sitting on like hackernews.com, if that exists, and they're saying, okay, this is what we're seeing. These are the attack patterns. Here are the people who are talking about taking down these organizations, right? Like on those chat forums, you'd see like people saying, oh, I really don't like company XYZ. I want to start attacking them. So these people actually collect all that information and they say, hey, look, these people are trying to be a bit naughty there. So that's the kind of intelligence feed you get into your discovery platform. And then you have your log analysis. So the important thing about logging is you need to be logging the right thing, right? You can't just say, oh, yeah, I'm logging, and just off you go. You have to be logging the right information. You've got to store that information for a substantial amount of time, like it's usually about 3 years. And you've got to make use of that information. That logging sort of philosophy, companies like Netflix take it so far that they say Netflix is a logging company, but they also do video, right? Because of the amount of logs that they generate. So log analysis is basically going through all the data and saying, okay, show me what's going on. Now, pattern mining is an interesting one, because what pattern mining does is it looks at multiple log sources. So say you have about 300 different types of logs that are coming in every day into your repository. It looks for similar patterns across all the different log sources, and it says, okay, is there any correlation between those sources? What can I see that I can kind of make sense in some sort of abstract way. Because remember, there's no rules, right? Yeah, I actually should have made that visible. So with discovery, you don't really have any rules or signatures, and you can't make any assumptions, because the moment you start making assumptions, you've cut down your scope, right? So that's pattern mining, and then with behavior learning, what you pretty much say is the system starts sort of learning what normal looks like for a particular environment. So say Monday morning, 9 o'clock, I have this much activity on all these different domains, right? On one particular Monday, if everything's just going crazy, I know something's going wrong. So that's what learning what normal is means. And it goes as far as learning the behavior of each user. So it says, okay, Asjad comes into office every morning and then goes on Facebook, right? So that's normal for me. But if the CEO came in and did that, which is not normal because he doesn't use Facebook, that would start raising alarms, right? It wouldn't really raise an alarm, but it would sort of, make that interesting. And different events that are interesting, they build up, and then they raise an alarm once they start crossing a certain threshold. And another really important one is application of context, right? So if the CEO is going on Facebook, and if he's just checking out some link that somebody sent him for a marketing campaign, for example, that's not really bad. It's not risky. It's just interesting, right? Or it's just weird. So that context is really important. It basically tells you the difference between a risky anomaly and a weird anomaly, right? So another example is, say somebody logged in at 2 a.m. Australian time, right? And they're checking their email. That's really weird. They've never done that before. And that's like a really sort of weird time for somebody to be checking their email, right? So chances are somebody's compromised their account. But what if they're traveling, right? They're in another time zone and they're checking their email. That level of context really helps in determining if it's actually something bad or if it's just normal. And it learns from that normal. So every time somebody travels, that context goes into the application. It applies on that data that it generates. So that's the kind of context we're talking about. And at the end, it's all about the human analysis. So the platform basically does as much as it can. It will learn as much as it can from different behaviors. It'll apply all these different sources of context. Once it's done that, it says, okay, I think there's an 80% chance that this is weird, right? Let's go check it out. But the platform can't do that on its own, because somebody has to get in touch with the person. They have to say, oh, hey, were you doing this? Like, was that you or was that somebody else? Were you really trying to steal all these documents from SharePoint, for example? Or were you just like downloading all this for some weird reason? So that's where the human component comes in, and the human can really make that difference, and that's when the feedback loop comes in as well. So every time the human analyzes the situation, they say, okay, this is what was wrong, this is where your analysis was correct, this is where your analysis is wrong. So that goes in and improves that incrementally. And as you do discovery, you pretty much discover new security controls that you can put into place, right? And in that way, you keep on incrementally improving your organization's security. So the more discovery you do, the better your security is going to be in the long run. And the good thing about it is it's also adaptive, and it sort of accounts for decay, right? So say my behavior's been changing over the last year. I'm slowly starting to not go on Facebook the first thing I come to work in the morning. That kind of stuff's considered as well. So and the idea is to reduce the number of false positives and to reduce the number of the amount of human analysis, so that we can look at more and more data automatically. So it's not easy. We've sort of come across a lot of challenges. Now, in the Telstra environment, we usually see about 30 million events a day from multiple sources of data. There's about 300 different sources of data. And what that essentially means is it's a couple of terabytes uncompressed every day, right? Even though it's 30 million events, proxy events are massive, right? It has all that information that people were sort of looking at, for example. Email events are massive. They contain attachment information, like it even goes as far as analyzing binaries that were attached to emails, or like PDFs or whatever you want to call it. So that's really challenging, right? How do you build a sort of distributed system that can ingest all these different sources of data, analyze it so much, and still give you some kind of meaningful results? The other problem is humans are very noisy, right? Humans do very weird things. We had this one issue where somebody was checking their email at 4 a.m. in the morning. Turns out they were just bored and couldn't sleep, so they just went and checked their email at 4 a.m. Now, that's weird, right, if you look at it from a security context. But it's not really weird when it comes to the human. They're just being bored. So there's so many sort of issues like that. Another example was somebody at a retail shop left their computer open during the night. They didn't log off, and there was a program running on the computer that was basically pinging this server. It was like a stay alive connection. And the system thought that was sort of an advanced persistent threat, right? Somebody's just pinging this server every 30 minutes. What's going on? Are we compromised? No, somebody just left their computer on. And environments are really complex as well. So we got like all these different network sort of segmentations we can't see very clearly where information's moving, right? There's PCI DSS compliant issues, for example, where you can't see certain parts of the environment. So yeah, it can get really messy, but that's, in my opinion, that's the sort of interesting part, that's the challenging part, and that's what makes discovery really interesting. So in my opinion, I think that's where cybersecurity is headed towards. You see all these rules and signatures that come in, but yeah, where do we go now? So I'm just going to leave you with this last bit of information. If you're a startup owner, or if you write apps for a living and you don't want to get compromised, or you want to have the best security you want, where do you start? So a few good questions to ask yourself is, do I know the value of my data? Does it really matter if I get compromised? Am I going to lose my entire business or not really? Right? So it's important to know how valuable your data is. And then it's also valuable to know how well the data is protected, right? Is it encrypted? Is it not? Do I have a password on my database? Or is it just accessible to everyone? Who has access to my data? Is it just my employees? Is it my contractors? Is it all my customers? Where is my data, right? Who's protecting my data? Who's in charge? Who am I paying money to make sure I don't get compromised? And yeah, asking those basic questions will pretty much sort of help you figure out what you need to do to implement good security controls in your organization. So those are the 5 nodes of cybersecurity. So yeah, unless you have any questions, that's pretty much it for me. Yep.
Yeah, just a quick question. How big is the discovery team at Telstra?
So it's only about 5 people at the moment. But yeah, we're looking at expanding.
And that's just for Telstra as a customer, or also for Telstra as customers?
So Telstra is one of our customers. We aren't actively servicing external customers at the moment, but it's in the pipeline because the platform is in the sort of alpha stages at the moment. So Telstra's like the pilot customer, but yeah, there's other customers in the pipeline. Centralized logging, okay. So when you have all these different web services that you've configured, a good thing to do is there's stuff like Splunk, which you can use to like analyze your data, but there's also like these free sort of alternatives. I think it's called FluentD. There's also Sumo Logic, but Splunk is really good, and it's got a community edition, which lets you ingest 500 megs a day. So you install Splunk, and then you set up forwarders in your different sort of systems or sort of clusters of computers. That basically starts streaming data to your Splunk instance. That'll ingest the data. It's not structured or anything, so you can sort of change the data as much as you like in different streams. And you can then query the data. You can run sort of analytics, and you can monitor what happens in your environment. So I'd recommend Splunk if you want to do the centralized logging.
Any other questions?
I think the concept of discovery is fascinating, but is there a tension there as well with privacy concerns as well, with the type of information you're logging?
Yeah, so with this information, it's pretty much information inside the organization. And we take efforts to like censor the data wherever we can. So it's not sort of tying back to certain users where it's applicable. But say stuff like emails and proxies, you pretty much need to know where the traffic came from to sort of reasonably make sense of it. So yeah, it's internal organization data. And every employee that works for a company pretty much says, okay, if I'm going to use company equipment, I'm going to be using it for business purposes. And the idea is that it's for the security of the company, right? So if somebody is just going on Facebook every day in the morning, nobody cares, right? As long as you do your work, nobody cares. But if somebody's introducing malware into the company, then that's a problem, and that can impact everybody that works with the company. So I think there's like a balance of like security and like privacy and like ease of use and stuff like that. But it's where you draw the line, and it's where the priorities of the organization are as well. If the organization really wants to strengthen their security, then we pretty much need to do stuff like this. But if it's like a really small organization and you don't have insider threat, for example, or you don't have so many moving parts that discovery is essential, you don't have to. So yeah, wherever there's very sensitive data, it's censored, for example. So like say, what's a good example? Yeah, like that's external data, but yeah, that's a good point. But say inside the organization, stuff like leave requests, for example, right? It can contain sensitive information, so we don't necessarily analyze that data because it can say, oh, look, my wife was sick and I couldn't come to work. So like we don't really want to analyze that data. But proxy data, which could be a really sort of big indicator to threats in your network, we do want to analyze it, and we want to see which computer it came from, which user account was signed in at the time. So yeah, just depends what you're looking at. Hey.
Do you use machine learning to help and like find anomalies?
Yeah, so a big part of the anomaly detection is actually based on machine learning, and like there's different types. So even though we want to ask the sort of broad question, right, and we want to say, okay, tell me everything that's weird, you can't really apply a machine learning concept to it because there's so much variation, right? What's your baseline? Where do you sort of draw the line and say, okay, that's normal, that's not normal? So you have all these different sort of characteristics that you're looking for example. So you have like your data points. So you say, okay, I've got a host, I've got a username, I've got an IP address, for example. So those are your data points. And you apply, like there's different kinds of algorithms. So it's not necessarily like a neural network that just does everything for you, but there's some very simple regression models, for example. In some contexts where you're, say, mining for patterns, or you're looking at email data where you're saying, okay, I'm trying to analyze if this employee is actually an insider threat to me, or if they're trying to do something malicious, or if they're going to click on a phishing link, for example, that at that point you'd start using something a bit more complex. So yeah, there is machine learning, a lot of it. We're actually doing a bit of research with Deakin University in Melbourne, who are sort of doing that machine learning research for us. And there's a few data scientists in the wider team as well who do that, who develop those algorithms.
Okay, cool.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, guys.